The motion sensor pinged at 1:43 p.m. on a scorching Tuesday afternoon. David Hernandez, a 42-year-old cybersecurity analyst who'd been working from home since the pandemic, looked up from his laptop just in time to see a woman in a bright pink swimsuit and oversized sunglasses climbing over his 6-foot privacy fence. Not climbing around to the gate, not knocking on his door, climbing over his fence like she owned the place. This wasn't the first time. For 6 weeks, David had been finding wet footprints on his deck, displaced pool furniture, and his carefully balanced pool chemicals thrown completely off. 6 weeks of coming outside to find someone had been using his pool while he worked in his home office. 6 weeks of filing police reports that went nowhere because he could never catch them in the act. But today was different. Today, David had spent $300 on hidden cameras, and the woman currently doing a backstroke in his pool had no idea she was being recorded from 4 different angles, or that the exhausted IT professional she'd been stealing from had spent the last 2 weeks tracing her digital footprint back to an address just 3 blocks away. Before we dive into how David turned his pool into the perfect trap, if you love stories where entitled people finally face consequences and justice gets served ice cold, hit that like button and subscribe. Now let's see exactly how this neighborhood nightmare became one woman's worst day ever. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that turned a peaceful man's sanctuary into a source of anxiety, the confrontation where a trespasser realized she'd been stealing from exactly the wrong person, and the resolution where entitlement met the full weight of consequences. The first part takes you through David's mounting frustration as a stranger repeatedly invaded his private property. You'll feel the toll it took on his sense of security, his failed attempts to get help from authorities who dismissed him, and the moment when a cybersecurity expert decided to use his professional skills for personal justice. The violation wasn't just about the pool. It was about the arrogance of someone who felt entitled to take what wasn't theirs, over and over again, while David worked just 50 feet away inside his own home. The second part is where power shifts completely. When David finally caught her in the act, the confrontation revealed something the trespasser never expected. He knew everything. Her name, her address, her husband's business, even her social media posts complaining about her own broken pool. The ultimatum he delivered, backed by irrefutable evidence and a professional understanding of exactly what legal consequences she faced, stripped away every ounce of her entitlement in seconds. The third part delivers the justice you're waiting for. The punishment unfolded with surprising twists, including an unexpected visitor who made everything exponentially worse for the trespasser. You'll see how a simple property crime became a neighborhood scandal, how consequences rippled through her life in ways she never imagined, and how David finally reclaimed the peace that had been stolen from him. Here's exactly how it happened. David Hernandez had moved into the modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Phoenix, Arizona, exactly 14 months before the trespassing began. At 42, he'd finally scraped together enough for a down payment after years of apartment living, and the selling point had been the backyard oasis, a sparkling blue pool surrounded by desert landscaping, all enclosed by a tall wooden privacy fence. As a cybersecurity analyst for a financial services company, David worked remotely, spending 60-hour weeks monitoring network threats and conducting digital forensics. The pool wasn't a luxury, it was therapy. After staring at screens all day hunting hackers, those evening swims kept him sane. The first incident happened on a Wednesday in late April. David had finished work around 6:30 and walked outside with a beer to find the pool gate standing wide open. His carefully arranged lounge chairs were moved, and wet footprints tracked across the concrete deck, footprints too small to be his size 11 boots. The pool vacuum he'd left running that morning was unplugged and floating loose. His first thought was neighborhood kids. Maybe someone's ball went over and they'd hopped the fence to retrieve it. Annoying, but explainable. He secured the gate with a better lock and didn't think much more about it. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time on a Friday afternoon when he'd stepped away for a grocery run. He returned to find not just wet footprints, but a half-empty wine cooler bottle left on his deck table and his pool. Chemicals noticeably diluted. Someone had been in the water long enough to throw off the carefully maintained pH balance he checked religiously. David felt his stomach drop. This wasn't kids. This was an adult who'd spent significant time in his pool, drinking, treating his property like a public park. He immediately called the Phoenix Police non-emergency line. The dispatcher was polite, but useless. "Without catching them in the act, sir, there's not much we can do. I'd suggest better locks and maybe some security cameras." The third incident was the breaking point. Memorial Day weekend, David had been inside working an emergency security breach, a Sunday afternoon server compromise that required his immediate attention. 4 hours of intense focus tracking the intrusion, and when he finally emerged at 7 p.m., exhausted and starving, his pool area looked like someone had thrown a party. 2 empty wine bottles, a wet beach towel that wasn't his draped over his fence. His expensive Bluetooth speaker, which he'd left on the deck table, was now at the bottom of the pool, completely ruined. And floating in the water were the crushed remains of what had once been his grandmother's ceramic garden gnome, a tacky but sentimental decoration she'd given him before she died. It was shattered across the pool floor, its cheerful painted face cracked into pieces. David stood there for a full minute, hands shaking, staring at the submerged fragments of the last gift his grandmother ever gave him. The violation wasn't about the pool anymore. It was personal. It was contemptuous. Someone was using his property, destroying his belongings, and laughing at his inability to stop them. He called the police again. Officer Martinez showed up 40 minutes later, walked the property, and delivered the same useless advice. Get cameras. Change your locks. Maybe post some no trespassing signs. When David pressed about patrols or stakeouts, Martinez actually laughed. "Sir, we've got armed robberies and domestic violence calls. I can't spare officers to watch your pool." The message was clear. You're on your own. The next morning, David tried a different approach. He took photos of the damage, printed them out, and spent 3 hours walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen suspicious activity. Most people were sympathetic but unhelpful. One elderly man 3 houses down mentioned seeing a lady in pink walking past several times, but couldn't provide more details. A teenager across the street said he'd heard splashing sounds around midday on weekdays, but assumed it was David. Nobody had actually witnessed the trespassing directly. Humiliated and exhausted, David realized the truth. Authorities wouldn't help. Neighbors couldn't help, and confronting a phantom wasn't possible. But as he sat at his computer that evening, staring at the security monitoring tools he used professionally to track digital intruders, something clicked. He spent 12 hours a day hunting people who thought they were invisible online. Why couldn't he hunt a physical trespasser the same way? If this entitled pool thief wanted to play games, they'd just challenge someone who investigated criminals for a living. David stopped looking for help and started building a case. He ordered 4 wireless security cameras with motion alerts and cloud backup. He documented every previous incident with timestamps and photos. He began working from a desk with a direct view of the backyard. And on June 15th, 3 weeks after the grandmother's gnome was destroyed, David received an alert on his phone, glanced at the live camera feed, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Everything was finally ready, and his trespasser had just walked straight into the trap. The woman cleared his fence at 1:43 p.m. on Tuesday, June 18th. David watched through his laptop as she landed in his backyard with practiced ease. Wearing a pink swimsuit and designer sunglasses, carrying a canvas beach bag, she walked straight to his pool deck like she owned it, spread out a towel on his lounge chair, and set up her phone, a magazine, and a large tumbler that almost certainly contained alcohol. Then she dove into his pool with a satisfied sigh he could hear through his slightly opened office window. David counted to 60, letting her get comfortable. He wanted her relaxed, unsuspecting, deeply invested in the moment. Then he stood up, walked through his kitchen, slid open the glass door, and stepped onto the deck. The woman was floating on her back, eyes closed, earbuds in, completely oblivious. David walked to the pool's edge, positioned himself directly in her line of sight, and cleared his throat loudly. She jolted upright, water splashing, earbuds flying out. For 3 full seconds, they stared at each other. Then she recovered, with the kind of audacity that takes years of entitlement to develop. She actually smiled. "Oh, hi there! I hope you don't mind, but your pool looked so inviting, and mine's been under renovation for weeks. I figured since you're never out here during the day anyway." "Get out of my pool, Mrs. Patterson," David said calmly. The smile vanished. Her eyes went wide. "I what? How do you—" "Jennifer Patterson, 46 years old. 2847 Saguaro Drive, 3 blocks south. Married to Robert Patterson, owner of Patterson Commercial Real Estate. You have 2 teenage daughters, Emma and Sophie, both students at Desert Vista High School. Your own pool has been drained since May 1st. Not under renovation, but because you refused to pay for repairs after your husband's business took a hit during the commercial real estate downturn." "You've been trespassing in my pool for 6 weeks." Jennifer scrambled backward in the water, her face cycling through denial, fear, and calculation. "You can't— that's private information. How dare you investigate me?" David pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up, showing the camera feed. 4 cameras, Mrs. Patterson, all cloud-connected, all recording since June 1st. I have footage of you trespassing on 17 separate occasions. I have timestamps. I have your face clearly visible in every frame. And because I work in cybersecurity, I spent exactly 3 hours tracking your social media posts, your husband's business registration, and your daughter's public Instagram accounts where they conveniently tagged your address in multiple posts." He walked to the pool's edge, crouching down so they were eye level, his voice dropping to something colder. "I also have footage of you breaking my grandmother's garden gnome and leaving it at the bottom of my pool. That's destruction of property. I have 17 counts of criminal trespassing, all documented, all admissible in court. And I have your husband's business email address, your daughter's school principal's contact information, and the neighborhood HOA president's phone number all queued up and ready to send this footage to." Jennifer's face had gone chalk white. "You wouldn't— please, my daughters would be mortified. My husband's business is already struggling. I just needed to cool off. I wasn't hurting anyone. You destroyed something irreplaceable from my dead grandmother. You've cost me hundreds in pool chemical rebalancing. You've made me feel unsafe in my own home for 6 weeks. And you did it because you thought a man working from home was easy prey." David stood up, crossing his arms. "Here's what happens next, Mrs. Patterson. You have 2 options. Choose carefully." She pulled herself to the pool's edge, gripping the concrete, looking up at him with something between terror and fury. "What options?" "Option 1, I call the police right now with 17 counts of documented trespassing. I file a civil lawsuit for property damage, emotional distress, and the cost of my security system. I send this footage to your husband, your daughters, the HOA, and every local news station that loves a good entitled neighbor story. Your face will be on Facebook neighborhood pages by dinner. Your husband's struggling business will be associated with a criminal trespasser. Your daughters will see their mother's mugshot." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or option 2. What's option 2? Her voice was barely a whisper. "You pay for everything. The security cameras, $300. Pool chemical rebalancing, $200. My ruined Bluetooth speaker, $150. A replacement for my grandmother's garden gnome, custom ceramic, which I've already located online, $200. And $500 for my time spent documenting your crimes and the emotional distress of being repeatedly violated in my own home. Total, $1,350 cash, delivered to my mailbox by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning in a sealed envelope. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed. That's extortion. No, Mrs. Patterson, that's restitution. Extortion would be me demanding money to not release footage of a crime. I'm offering you the chance to make right the damages you caused instead of facing legal consequences. You don't want option one, trust me. Criminal trespassing in Arizona carries up to 6 months in jail and a $2,500 fine per offense. Multiply that by 17 incidents. David pulled a business card from his pocket and dropped it on the deck beside her. That has my email. After you deliver the cash, you'll send me a written apology detailing every incident and acknowledging your actions. Then you'll never come within 50 feet of my property again. David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I send everything to everyone simultaneously. Police, your family, the media, and Mrs. Patterson? I'm very, very good at what I do. I'll make sure this story goes viral. There's nothing internet communities love more than an entitled neighbor getting caught. He straightened up. You have until 8 a.m. The clock's ticking. Now get out of my pool, get off my property, and pray I don't change my mind about giving you option two. Jennifer Patterson climbed out of his pool like a woman in a trance. She gathered her belongings with shaking hands, wrapped the towel around herself, and walked toward the gate without another word. At the fence, she turned back once, mouth open like she might argue, but David simply held up his phone showing the still recording camera feed. She fled. David watched her scale the fence and disappear down the alley. Then he sat down on his lounge chair, looked up at the cloudless Arizona sky, and finally let himself smile. For 6 weeks, this woman had treated him like he was powerless, like he didn't matter, like his property, his privacy, and his peace were things she could take without consequences. She'd just learned exactly how wrong she was. The next morning at 7:52 a.m., David's doorbell camera captured Jennifer Patterson approaching his mailbox. She was wearing sunglasses despite the early hour, clearly trying to hide her face, and her hands shook as she shoved a thick manila envelope inside. She glanced at his house once, and David, watching through the camera feed from his office, gave a little wave even though he knew she couldn't see him through the tinted window. She practically ran back to her car. The envelope contained $1,300 bills and 5 tens, exactly $1,350 in cash. By noon, an email arrived from an address clearly created just for this purpose. A 3-paragraph apology detailing all 17 incidents, admitting to the property damage, and promising never to return. It was stiff, clearly written under duress, but it was complete. David thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. At 4:30 p.m. that same day, his doorbell rang. David answered to find a red-faced man in an expensive suit, veins bulging in his neck, radiating barely controlled fury. "Are you David Hernandez?" "I am." "And you're Robert Patterson." That stopped him. "My wife told me what happened." "What you accused her of?" "What you threatened her with." "Now you listen to me." "No, Mr. Patterson, you listen to me." David stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. "Your wife committed 17 documented crimes on my property over 6 weeks. She destroyed irreplaceable property belonging to my dead grandmother. She made me feel unsafe in my own home. And when I caught her yesterday, she tried to justify it by saying she just needed to cool off. Would you like to see the footage?" Robert's mouth opened, then closed. She said you were exaggerating, that it was only a couple of times." David pulled out his phone, loaded the camera app, and showed him the folder labeled Patterson trespassing. 17 video files, each with date and timestamps. He played 3 at random, Jennifer lounging in his pool, Jennifer helping herself to his pool supplies, Jennifer leaving trash on his deck. In every clip, her face was crystal clear. Robert Patterson's rage drained away, replaced by horror. "Oh my God, Jen, what did you do?" "What she did," David said quietly, "was commit multiple felonies because she felt entitled to something that wasn't hers. I offered her a chance to make it right privately. She paid restitution this morning. If she comes near my property again, or if you or anyone in your family retaliates in any way, all of this goes to the police and social media simultaneously. Am I clear?" Robert nodded slowly, looking like a man who'd just watched his life complicate exponentially. "She's been stressed. The business hasn't been good. Our pool costs were too much. But that's no excuse. Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. I'll make sure she never—" He stopped, looking at David with something like grudging respect. "You could have destroyed her." "Destroyed us? Why didn't you?" David considered the question. "Because I'm not interested in destruction, Mr. Patterson. I'm interested in consequences. Your wife needed to learn that actions have results, that people aren't just obstacles to ignore. The cash ensures she feels the financial sting. The footage ensures she never forgets she got caught. And this conversation ensures her family knows what she did. That's sufficient." Robert nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth. You did the right thing. The way you did it." He walked to his car without looking back. 3 weeks later, David was floating in his pool on a Saturday afternoon, beer in hand, when his neighbor Marissa from 2 houses down called over the fence. "Hey, David! Haven't seen your mysterious pool visitor lately. Did they finally give up?" David smiled, taking a sip of his beer. "Let's just say they learned this pool isn't open to the public. Good for you. You know, I saw Jennifer Patterson at the grocery store yesterday. She practically sprinted down a different aisle when she spotted me. Weird, right?" "Very weird," David agreed, keeping his expression neutral. 2 months after the confrontation, David added a small ceramic gnome to his pool deck, not his grandmother's original, but a close replica he'd found on Etsy. It smiled cheerfully in the Arizona sun, a tiny guardian of a space that was finally completely his again. No more mysterious wet footprints. No more violated privacy. No more coming home to find evidence that someone had stolen his peace. David had learned something important through this whole experience. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a police report. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be a victim, from using your skills and intelligence to take back control, from making someone face the real consequences of their entitled behavior. And as he floated there in the afternoon sun, his pool perfectly balanced, his property perfectly secure, his life perfectly peaceful again, David closed his eyes and smiled. Because justice, whether served hot or cold, was equally satisfying. Across the country in Portland, Oregon, former prosecutor Margaret Chen was tending her garden when a woman in yoga pants marched up her driveway and demanded she remove the unsightly vegetable beds that were ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. Margaret looked up slowly, the same expression she'd once used to face hostile witnesses, and reached for the property deed she kept in her garden shed, the one showing her land predated the HOA by 40 years. "I've faced down defense attorneys, hostile judges, and career criminals," Margaret said softly. "You think a woman in Lululemon intimidates me?" The neighbor's eyes went wide as Margaret pulled out her phone, showing the